Thank you for listening. Today's show is a joint production of Atheists Talk and the Doug Pagitt radio program. Please enjoy this discussion between August Berkshire, Doug Pagitt, Scott Lohman, John Busick, and Stephanie Zavan. The show was pre-recorded on December 15th, so unfortunately we cannot take your calls or emails. Both shows will return live on January 8th.
Hey, thanks, guys, again for doing this, and Stephanie for being part of this. I think this is quite fun, and we're going to turn the tables now in the second hour, and I've got some questions for atheists and humanists.
And we have all the answers.
Isn't that fortunate? That's awesome, as opposed to the sort of circular runaround that I gave you in the first hour. All right, so be straight with me, people. All right, here's one of the questions I think is interesting, and a number of people have raised when I told them we were going to do this show. It seems that atheism is coming from a perspective of trying to prove something that doesn't exist. And there's kind of a commitment to that. It's about there not being a God. But humanism wants to say there's a way of human beings to live in the world, and proclaims a humanist sort of manifesto or a humanist way about it. So I'm interested in the interplay, because you represent the Minnesota atheists and you represent the Minnesota humanists. I'm interested to know what the interplay is between humanism and atheism, and why it isn't just one thing. Why isn't there just one organization, or why isn't there just one worldview here?
Yeah, I mean, August, isn't it time for the atheists to end their codependent relationship with Jesus Christ?
No, we disbelieve in all gods. So when belief in all gods ceases, our organization will be out of business, and we will happily fold our organization.
Can I ask you a follow-up on that before we get to this atheist thing? How do you define a god?
How would I define?
What is a god? What is the god?
I tried to pin you down in this last hour,
I know.
and I don't think you had it. But okay, for me,
what is a god that you're saying has to go away?
Okay. The problem is, well, first, how I would define a god is it could be a being, entity, or force. But it has to have consciousness. If you say God is the wind and the wind doesn't have any consciousness, it's just blowing, why call it God? It's just the wind. So whatever this God thing is, it has to have consciousness. It has to at least be partly non-natural, supernatural, whatever that means. Because if it's all natural, it's part of nature. And it has to be able to, at least sometimes, do things that violate the natural order. Okay. Not always. Doesn't have to be all powerful.
So you want that kind of God?
It kind of has to have a minimal
go away.
Well, the problem is then the people start
because I'm going to recruit you then to my view, because I don't have that view of God at all.
So. Because then people start attributing things to this mysterious, invisible force. Right. And as Stephanie said last segment, how do you trump the invisible Almighty that you have defined in a way that can't be disproved?
Okay, so the Minnesota atheists, or the atheists as a whole, would have an agenda to try to dispel the notion of a God that has some kind of consciousness, is supernatural in ability, and what was the third one? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say that can do miracles, although that would be fine.
Be supernatural, break the rules of nature.
Break the rules of nature.
Break the rules of nature.
Because so many bad things are attributed to this God.
And I would suggest that many Christian and Jewish theologians, and I can't speak outside of that scope, would tell you the God that they speak about doesn't fit those categories at all. That those categories are mythological, maybe Greek, Roman categories, but they're not Christian, they're not Jewish categories. God is not called as having a consciousness like human beings have. It's a far different, more expansive consciousness. That God is not supernatural and separate from creation at all. All creation is created out of God and through God, and it's not separate from God. And when God acts in creation, it's not breaking laws. It is God fulfilling what always should have been. So now you can buy that or not buy that, but that is not at all. I would be with you, and we should partner and link arms to remove that kind of God.
But God is somehow separate from nature, right?
No.
It's just this is where I was trying to pin you down on last segment.
I know you were.
What is a God?
Well, God is not separate from nature any more than you are.
You're not telling me what it is.
I know, August, because you have a category that is going to require, the only answer you're going to be satisfied with is one that fits the category that you believe that God is separate from nature. And I'm trying to tell you, as a Christian theologian, we would say over and over, and the authoritative parts of the Bible say these kinds of things. Christian tradition says it, and I'm saying, like, it's been consistent throughout time, that all things were created in, by, and through God. So we don't proclaim a separation of God from all creation. It's not that dualism. That is a philosophical category. And we can talk about that more in this segment. So, okay, can we talk a little bit about the human atheism divide?
Yeah.
Or is that? Do you want to keep going on that?
Well, basically,
he definitely wants to keep going.
So you're saying God is composed of atoms, right?
No.
But he's part of nature.
But not everything.
And nature,
not everything in nature
and
is composed of atoms, right?
Electromagnetism or forces.
There's forces.
Yeah.
So forces they're real, right? I mean, you do hold the forces.
So God is gravity and electricity.
So what I'm saying to you is there are categories beyond atoms. There are categories beyond subatomic level. There are forces. And 150 years ago, there's a whole category of forces we now know about that 150 years ago we didn't. And it's just not sufficient to say, if I don't have a category for God, like 150 years ago you wouldn't have had a category for electromagnetism, then it's nonsense, silliness, we should dispense of it.
So God is composed of particles we haven't discovered yet?
No, they're not particles. Particles and atoms, the world is more than particle physics, right?
Well, let's look at energy then.
Yes. Okay. But what I'm saying to you, August, is not that God is simply particles or is simply energy any more than energy is a particle. There are more categories than one. There are more categories than two. And because human beings are limited in our ability to measure, which we are limited in, we cannot measure all that is. Then to say you will only believe things that can be measured by human capacity to measure has been throughout history a failure and a fault and remains one. And to apply that to God is overstepping the rules of science.
But what you're saying is God falls in a category that we know nothing about. Well, that means that we can know nothing about your God.
No, it's to know nothing about it. If I say that there is a category of God, and you say, well, there is no category of God. Now we're doing philosophy. You know we're doing philosophy. We're not doing science, right? We're now doing philosophy. And I'm all for that. So, and this is one of the questions I want to get to you later, and because we've had this conversation lots of times, switching from hard science theory and requirements to philosophical requirements. And I think that is a fine move to make, if you will agree that's what we're going to do, and not then drag us back into the hard sciences arguments when we've moved into the soft science arguments.
No, we can all fantasize and speculate about what a God is and call it philosophy, but you're making statements. God is this. God is that.
God is love is what I've proclaimed, right? Okay. So love is something that exists. It's not. I don't believe it's just a chemical reaction. We can differ on that if we want. I think it's something more grand, I would suggest to you. But what I want to say, I mean, again, when we had this conversation in the first hour, 150 years ago, there were whole notions that people didn't believe existed. Electromagnetism, germs, the sense of a solar system that we now understand, all of these things that now we have measurements for things we didn't previously. And I would suggest to you that in 300 or 500 or 5,000 years of human science deliberation, we haven't come up with the ability to measure all that is in the cosmos. We're spending all this time trying to figure out how actually force exists. So let's tell ourselves, just remind ourselves that as human beings, we can only measure a fraction of what is. And perhaps in what we can't yet measure is God, and not require God to fit into our measurement systems.
Well, and that's what always throws us, because as soon as we start talking about, and trying to get that is everybody says, well, you're attacking the wrong God. It's like, our God is not defined this way. It's defined this way. And it's like, okay, this is worse than trying to nail Jell-O to the ceiling, because if we keep saying, well, these guys say that God has these things, fits into this category, and then we say, but we don't see that interacting in the universe. They say, oh, because you're looking at the wrong definition of God. And so that's where where the frustration comes from our side is like, you're almost describing as in one of the things, I'm a hardcore science fiction person, is the Force in Star Wars, is that, in the original, the first trilogy before the midichlorians showed up, and
let's not go there.
We won't go there.
There was only one trilogy.
Okay. The Force permeated everything. It was in the rocks, as Yoda said, and it's like, okay, that works. But again, that's, trying to nail it down and measure it, which is, what a lot of we humans do, makes it tough.
One of the nailing things down and measuring them is one of the things that we do as human beings with certain factors. Yes, I would agree. It's like nailing Jell-O to the wall, and what you should never try to do is nail Jell-O to a wall. The nature of Jell-O is unnailable.
Exactly.
Because a nail is not meant for Jell-O and Jell-O for a nail. And I would suggest to you, our measurement systems are like that with all the things we don't yet know how to measure, including God.
Yeah, and trying to define God seems similarly elusive.
Yeah, well, yes. Unless you're going to say, as you did, I want God to fit these three categories. And I would say to you, in Christian tradition, as I've argued before, here's what God is: creator of all, the force of love in the world. That's God. Now, you can say, I can't measure that. And then we're going to get back in this other conversation that you don't want to believe anything that can't be measured.
Let's talk about love in the next segment.
Okay. I want to do this humanist thing, too.
All right. Please stay with us through the break. You're listening to AM 950 KTNF.